Today, we take the concept of a mysterious roiling vortex of smoke, dreamscapes, darkness, and never-ending chaos, quite literally, as we journey to Hell. In this instance, a trip to Hell as the Vikings believed it to be. Were it not quite the underworld that we may have been programmed to imagine, full of flames and tortured souls, writhing in agony for eternity. This is the Norse Underworld, and it's nothing like we've been led to believe. Let's board the vessel of knowledge and journey beyond the veil, where the Norsemen call. Their legends echo through time, tangled with shadow and destiny. And if you are enjoying this content, please do take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It's much appreciated. In the vast and ancient tapestry of Norse cosmology, the universe was woven from the fabric of 9 realms, each a world unto itself that stemmed from the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree that bound together the cosmos by destiny and divine force. The fact that their ideals on the afterlife were fractured into 9 separate places thoroughly confused the rest of the world. So much so that the Norsemen were considered savages for not adhering to a cut-and-dry version of right and wrong, black and white, or heaven and hell. And whilst their views on what was sinful or worthy of praise may have been somewhat alien to many, the truth is that they did have a very rich, multi-layered view of heaven and hell. Let's begin with Asgard, a celestial stronghold in the sky, home to the first tribe of gods. They wove fate itself, laying the cornerstones of destiny. In Asgard is the palace Valhalla, where the bravest of human warriors go to be trained for the final battle against the gods, and the highest honor after death for any Norseman. Next was Jotunheim, a realm of the forsaken giants and the primordial creatures of chaos that were older than time itself. Between them lay Midgard, the fragile world of mortals, suspended in the abyss between gods and monsters, where humanity carved its fleeting existence. Fourth was Alfheim, that housed the enigmatic elves, luminous and distant as stars. After the home of the elves was Vanaheim, where the second tribe of gods lived, the gods who embodied fertility, war, love, and the birth of all things living. Here, too, the other warriors went. Any fighting man, regardless of how bravely he fought or how he died, deserved to spend eternity in lush, green divinity. The goddess Freya cared for these rather unremarkable warriors in a place called Fólkvangr. Given that written records of the Norse belief system are very fractured, it's hard to say whether or not Fólkvangr and Vanaheim exist on the same plane or next to each other. But the deities that oversaw the 2 places are intricately linked, so to speak of one is to speak of the other to a great extent. Personally, I'd choose Vanaheim for my heaven, as opposed to going on to an afterlife of even more fighting. But the Vikings, of course, had no notion of a life without clashing swords, now did they? Sixth was Nidavellir, the land of the dwarves, smiths of peerless craft, hidden from the eyes of those who would seek their treasures. And finally came Niflheim and Hel. Two separate hellscapes, yes, but set all your notions of hell aside for a moment, because these domains are not what you might think. Niflheim was hell in the true sense of the word, but not a hell for morally twisted human souls. Instead, it was a realm of endless frost and ancient darkness. A place where the cold gnawed at the bones of existence itself. It was one of the oldest realms in Norse cosmology, a primordial land of ice, mist, and sorrow, where silence reigned and warmth was but a forgotten dream. From its frozen depths flowed the well of Hvergelmir, a churning cauldron from which the rivers of creation spilled into the world. It was here that the great dragon, Nidhogg, gnawed at the roots of Yggdrasil, feeding on the dead and unraveling fate with every bite. Nidhogg is an unusual character in Norse mythology, for he appears in many of the realms, and seems to be one of the very few that can move with relative freedom between most of them, using Hvergelmir, the churning cauldron, as a passage between the realms in search of more souls to consume. So, long before the shaping of the cosmos, Niflheim stood as one half of the great cosmic contrast. The eternal frost opposite the raging fires of Muspelheim. From their collision, the first stirrings of life were born, setting in motion the grand story of gods, giants, and men. Be sure to take a look at some of our other videos where we explore chaos and creation, a concept that crops up in many different forms across many cultures, including even modern science. Though distant from the affairs of gods and mortals, Niflheim remained ever present, waiting in the shadows, whispering of the cold inevitability that all things, in time, must fade into the abyss. Niflheim's punishment was slow, an eternity of quiet oblivion, the place where gods, beasts, and beings were banished to spend eternity without light, warmth, or even sound. But human souls did not come to this version of hell. It was reserved for the entities above mere humans. And so, now, we move on to Helheim. Its similarity to our view of the cliché ends with the near-identical sound of the word, which itself shares many origins, most of them referring to something that is hidden, or a place underground. And yes, it is where we got our modern variation of the word for hell. Hel for the Nords, however, was ruled by the goddess, whose name was also Hel. She was one of the three monstrous offspring of Loki. The gods took one look at them and knew that to leave them to roam free would wreak havoc on the universe. Hel's brother Fenrir, the wolf, was chained, and the other brother, Jörmungandr, the serpent, was cast into the sea. But Hel was a different matter altogether. She too was a giant, like her father, and while one half of her was a beautiful, luscious woman, the other half was dead and decayed, like the very dead she ruled over. Hel did not have the lust for destruction and chaos that her brothers did. She was, well, an empty, impartial husk of a being. Immensely powerful, yes, but utterly devoid of an opinion, or the desire to immerse herself in the trysts of gods, men, and beasts, and with this, truly impartial, operating solely to observe, to keep and to maintain order as it should be. At first hearing, a strange-sounding character, but actually, this made Hel the perfect warden of Helheim, the resting place of all the people who did not die in battle. Women, children, those that perished from disease or from old age. In other words, the gods felt that if you were unremarkable, then you were fit for nothing more than an eternity spent repeating the boring life you lived day in and day out, forever. The souls in Helheim ate, worked, slept, and drank, like they did in life. But there was no laughter or joy, just an endless repetition of actions, over and over again. In a realm that was always cast in shadow and mist, an obscure place that was not exactly a punishment, but it was as dreary and cold as was its mistress's heart. A place for the dead to find their silent repose. And like Asgard had a grand hall for the very bravest of warriors, Helheim had a place for the oath-breakers, murderers, cowards, and betrayers. Nastrond was a horrifying shore within Helheim, where the dragon Nidhogg fed upon their corpses, gnawing away at their existence for eternity. While Helheim was a quiet, indifferent resting place, and its impartial warden Hel may even have an oddly quiet comfort to her, Nastrond was a sight of torment, its walls woven from writhing serpents that dripped venom upon the condemned, a place where no warmth or light could reach. It was less of a moral punishment and more a cosmic consequence, an inescapable fate for those who shattered the fabric of trust and order. Much more closely tied to our current idea of the chamber of torture and dread that Hel is. But Nastrond did not hold the intense fear to the Vikings, as our picture of Hel does for us. If anything, the dreary, bland existence for the everyday man took center stage. For to be so unremarkable that the gods would place you in a grey world, lacking all emotional expression, was a fate worse than an eternity of pain and suffering. And it is from this Nord's worldview we can begin to understand why outsiders were so horrified by the Viking perspective on sin, virtue, and what truly deserved punishment. To a warrior, there was no greater shame than weakness. Breaking an oath, abandoning your comrades, or worst of all, being ordinary, unremarkable. Ideals of morality that involved curbing natural human characteristics like lust, hunger, anger, and greed were perfectly natural to the Vikings. Whereas the rest viewed men who could curb their desires as morally superior to everyone else, the mighty Norsemen saw it as unnatural and a thinly veiled excuse for cowardice, too fearful to go out and take what your heart desired. The Vikings championed bravery, extraordinary character, and strength, while the rest sought to convince their subjects that to be ordinary, to live a life of hard work without praise, was more dignified and morally held in higher regard than the barbaric brutes that furred the seas and pillaged and warred, living a life led by the sinful desires of the flesh. And so we see, from what little we can truly patch together of their vibrant, unrestrained culture and lore, the Vikings were as wild and untethered at their core as was their multi-layered, unrestrained mythology. To them, it was not a simple split into evil and good. So why would their version of heaven and hell be anything other than a vast, multi-layered world of places for gods, giants, beasts, and men to reside? A multitude of realms that each ultimately connects the roots of Yggdrasil, the mighty world tree that stood as the axis of all things in the cosmos, the heart of Norse mythology. And whilst this voyage is at its end, there is plenty more adventure to come into the wild expanse of Viking mythology. If you'd like to join us on these future explorations, then please do consider subscribing. A like and a share really helps the channel grow too, and is very much appreciated. Until next time, be good, whatever that really means.